When we hear of the Renaissance, we think of the mushrooming and canonizing of new ideas in philosophy and in moral behavior. But very few people are aware where this Renaissance idea came from. They are not aware of the underlying current of the philosophy of ancient Egypt in the person of Djehuty, whose name in Greek was Thoth, and also named after their own god of wisdom, Hermes. Whilst under colonization from the 4th century by the Greeks, they discovered the writings of a book referred to as the Baura, which has been translated as Emanations of God. And that book became an important instrument for the propagation of ideas amongst Greeks. In the 2nd century AD, recognizing that the 2nd century was a time of the Roman control of Egypt, which they conquered the Greeks and took it over from them in the year 50. There was a book produced called the Hermetica, and the Hermetica contains a body of writing that relates to ancient Egypt and even contemporary Egypt at the time, going back as far as the School of Alexandria, or the Library of Alexandria. Now, a woman called Frances Yates, who is extolled as a very brilliant Renaissance studies scholar, put forward in a book that many of the Renaissance thinkers were misled into believing that Djehuty, or Thoth or Hermes, and therefore the philosophy that was contained in the Hermetica is of ancient origin. But she said, in fact, it emerged during the early stages of Christianity, and many of the philosophies contained there, she contended, had no ancient background whatsoever. Unfortunately for us, Frances Yates was merely a Renaissance scholar who did not look beyond the languages and the writings of Europe to verify or to compare the philosophy in the Hermetica with any other philosophy that may have emerged prior to the Hermetica's publication in the 2nd century. Many of the scholars, in fact, did not read hieroglyphics or Medinetra, as we call it, God's speech. They did not read it. Nor did they think of making comparisons with other African societies, particularly since they were under colonization or conquest from Greece, from Rome, and later on from other nations of the Western world. But once you did a careful analysis and careful study of the philosophy contained there, you will find that it is absolutely cognate and resonates absolutely with the most ancient of African philosophies in the time of Kemet. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote my book, to debunk the myth that there was no connection between ancient Egyptian philosophy and the Renaissance. In fact, the Renaissance thinkers characterized by four people: de Medici, who was the founder of and the financier of the Plato Academy in Florence; Ficino, who was a Catholic priest, a polymath, a man who played the harp, who composed songs, who was a philosopher, and who was searching for alternative ways of thinking and of being to that dispensed by the Church Fathers during the time of the Inquisition, which started in the 12th century and lasted until the middle of the 18th century, which persecuted people who were independently researching science, the concept of God, and other forms of worship and essentially of thinking. Anyone who thought outside the restriction of the Bible, and not just the Bible, but the geographical limitation placed upon thinking by the Church Fathers, were deemed as an enemy of the state and were persecuted and sometimes imprisoned and also burnt to death. As a result, there has been a relentless campaign by the murderers reflected in the Vatican and by the various Church Fathers, starting not only in Italy but all over Europe, in Spain and in Portugal, whose international policy was conquest and decimation of old societies and looking for gold, especially in South America, decimating populations, deliberately spreading diseases and killing people off by members of the Church Fathers, popes, and the highest echelons in the Vatican. These churchmen, represented by Ficino, Giovanni Bruno, and another man called Mirandola, they existed about 100 years apart, from about 1458 to 15 something. They all wanted to change that condition that they found themselves in, with murder, with death, with blasphemy, with corruption, sexual corruption, financial corruption, all kinds of anti-human behavior that was pervasive from the top. They wanted to change that. And as a result, in the Hermetica, which was found by one of the agents of de Medici, he brought it back to Florence and asked Ficino, who was translating Plato into Latin, he asked him to stop doing what he was doing and pay attention to the Hermetica which he wanted translated. And that is the book which contains the writings of Djehuty and of ancient Egyptian philosophy, which exploded the moral concepts of the human basis of life, the godly quest, which integrated, which sought unity with the Creator and the human being. Those ideas are 100% expressed in many of the writings of ancient Egypt. That influenced not just the Renaissance, but as I said in another context, influenced Muslim philosophy as well as pre-Muslim philosophy. So those people were persecuted. The person who refused to recant, and who I consider to be an advanced initiate in philosophy, was Giordano Bruno. His work was considered to be heresy. It was considered to be challenging the path, the doctrine, the lifestyle, the idealization of the church fathers who themselves were corrupt. Anywhere he wrote, and he challenged any well-known scholar who supported that kind of canon in Italy, he was made to apologize and his works burnt or removed from public view. He went to several European countries. Nobody wanted him. The only place, and this is very important, that welcomed him, when he came to England, he met the French ambassador, a man by the name of Michel Conselneau, who himself was a black man, who sported an afro. And he was the only source of comfort, support, and protection that Bruno met in the UK for 2 years. When he returned to Italy after that 2 years, he continued his pronouncements about philosophy and of the Catholic Church and their behavior. He was very unsparing in his criticism. And as a consequence, he was arrested, asked to recant, and he refused. And these people, who are meant to be the moral fiber of this Christian society, put this man to the stake, and he was burnt alive. Couldn't you imagine someone who is at the highest form of Christianity putting another human being, living, a live person, a live human being, fire under them, burning them alive, because not that they committed a crime, but that they were thinking of moral philosophy to supplant the decadence, the corruption, the perfidy that characterized the Vatican. This man was such an advanced initiate that he did not recant and went to his death. This tells you the extent to which the Hermetica and the conversations of Djehuty with one of his proteges meant so much, had such profound reverberation, such generous effect on the mentality of Bruno, that he steeled himself and was able to accept his fate as someone being burnt alive because of what he believed in and the moral stance that he received from receiving the Hermetica. And the whole of European thought during the time of the Renaissance resonated, percolated, and was expressed through the writings of the Hermetica, which became a profound influence on any person professing philosophy. Therein contain the writings and the voice of Djehuty, Thoth or Hermes, Mercurius amongst the Latin, and that transformed European society into becoming more tolerant, not totally tolerant, but more tolerant of what they may have considered the hostile, the other, the undermining view held by a few people who were not overwhelmed and refused to give in to the oppression, the extreme oppression of the Church Fathers during that period of time.